I grew up playing video games. I remember when my family got our first Super Nintendo, actually. That was the very first gaming console that we ever had in our home. You know, I was roughly about 5, 6 years old when we first got it, and I played the majority of Mario games, you know, typical kind of kid stuff. But when I actually got a little bit older, I started to get into fighting games a little bit. Started with Street Fighter 2 and first Mortal Kombat, which they censored the violence out of, actually, in the early parts of Nintendo days. Now, then I got to Mortal Kombat 2. Now, the violence on that one was not censored, and I was starting to play that when I was about 11, maybe 12 years old. And then the N64 came out. Now, I did not actually have one myself, but many of my friends did. And I remember many hours I spent at friends' houses playing GoldenEye. Now, when I got a little bit older, when I was about 12, 13, maybe 14, I started to get in. We finally got our first PC. And that's when I started to get into first-person shooters extremely heavily, and I just fell in love with them. You know, games like, you know, Unreal Tournament, Quake 3, System Shock 2, and the original Half-Life. Now I'm 23 years old. I'm a college student, and above all, I have no violent criminal record whatsoever. Now this is always a hot ticket for media, and this comes up every time something new or exciting comes out. I started hearing this argument first, with the video games anyway, first around the Columbine incident. And it's been kind of re-emerging ever since. It's just a convenient scapegoat to rationalize irrational behavior in the scared American public. Now, the thing that brings this up again is Modern Warfare 2, which Fox News tackled this quite well by saying it can make children become terrorists. Now, the direct quote was that they mentioned, as soon as it enters the home, there is nothing to stop the child from being a terrorist. That is a direct quote. Now, granted, the games that I grew up with were not nearly as good looking as the ones that we have now, but the argument still existed. You know, a principal reason for the Columbine incident was that they made a Doom mod with football players instead of monsters. But, you know, if these people are truly right, then their theory should still, in theory, their principles should still apply. Now, the American Psychological Institute published an article that actually said, in that article, it says that parallels can be drawn between media and video game violence and actual aggression in teens and young children. Now, that might seem contrary to what I'm trying to get across here, but listen to this. It also mentioned later in the article that video games can merely be one of many factors in physically carrying out violent acts. Now, which makes a very clear distinction that it is not a single secular reason for violent behavior. Now, when these studies are done on any types of media, not just video games, they neglect one very important detail. When I was 11 years old, violent video games, and I watched South Park, and I watched rated R movies, you know, Starship Troopers, Interview with the Vampire, like violent kind of stuff. But my mom was right there. She was always there monitoring what I was doing. She knew what I was watching. She knew the games I was playing, and she talked to me about it. She took an interest as a parent in what I was doing as her child. And that's a variable that doesn't come into play. Now, when I play games on Xbox Live, I know that's not happening. Because I know if I sit there and talk like that to my parent, if my parents heard me talking like that to other people, I would be throwing shoes at my child, quite honestly. You know, if these 9-year-old kids are sitting there on Xbox playing, like sitting there swearing over voice chat because they think it's cool and etc., etc. But see, parents need to realize that these things are not babysitters. And I can also say, as a result of parental intervention, I have never rationalized media violence as being real in any way. And henceforth, have had no psychological effects whatsoever. I'm not a violent or aggressive person by any means. Now onto the terrorism. Now, after playing the No Russian level, which was the airport level, which of course is the one in question, you were not playing as a terrorist. You are a CIA operative. Now, the guy in the Fox News interview tried to touch on this, but apparently he forgot the quote and was completely unprepared for it. The dialogue in the game mentions before you play the level that doing this you may lose a part of yourself. So it's demonizing these acts from the get-go before the level even starts. And the event took place to shock the player, to say, this is why you're fighting, this is why we need to stop this terrorist, and this is why all of this stuff is going on. It's a method of telling a story. Now, when the Die Hard 2, actually, when that movie was made in an airport, I didn't see any huge protest about it, but of course that was kind of a long time ago. Now, again, on to... Now, see, again, it tries to emphasize the point that you're saving people, not murdering them. You're fighting the terrorists in order to prevent something like that from happening again. And that is very clear to make. Now, children, when they're playing, if you set a child in front of this game, they would not be able to rationalize that the same way adults do. Now, parents need to use discretion when purchasing games for their children. No one knows their child better than you. And so, as a parent, you need to make decisions on whether or not it's appropriate. Another argument put up is, during the Fox News article, was once it's in the house, children can have access to it. Well, if a child overdoses on prescription drugs that they got from their parents, do you blame the pharmacy? Do you blame the pharmaceutical companies? Do you blame the doctor who prescribed them? Of course not. The first instinct in everyone's mind is going to be, why were parents leaving them out in the open to begin with? It is not the retailer's fault. It's not the industry's fault why this happens. Now, I will end by saying children are not little people. They take things quite literally for face value, and they don't understand the symbolism and underlying themes that these games are trying to portray. So, if you lay a kid down in front of Modern Warfare 2, they will not see the violent act as an adult would. It is the parent's responsibility to fill that gap and to teach children what is real and what is not, and by parents taking responsibility in what their child is doing. If your child shoots someone because they played a video game, it is not the game's fault. It is not the retailer's fault either. It's the parent's fault for not taking an interest and not knowing what their child is doing. And it is a failure straight up of the parent. It's almost like these arguments keep getting put up, like parents forgot how to be parents. So, I mean, that's really all I have to say, and I really hope this gets across to somebody. Thanks.